This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast about all things innovation in the people space. I'm Kyle Rode. Let's start the show. Welcome back, Rebel HR listeners. We are extremely excited for the guest this week. With us, we have Lisa Carlin. She is the co-founder and director of Future Builders Group. Welcome to the podcast, Lisa.
Thanks, Kyle. I'm really excited to talk to you today, all the way from Sydney, Australia.
And thank you so much for taking the time in your day at probably a little bit of an inopportune time. We both had to modify schedules just because we're so far apart in time zones. But I think from my standpoint, well worth the exercise to talk a little bit about the topic today, which we're going to be talking about how to turbocharge transformation. So I'd like to maybe start off with the first question. What got you interested in looking at how to do transformation correctly?
Well, I started with a fairly circuitous route, Kyle, because my first job was doing coding behind a mainframe COBOL computer screen at Accenture all the way in South Africa, which is where I grew up. And then I realized that a lot of the reason why the systems weren't actually implemented well or people didn't adopt them properly is because there wasn't really any attention paid to making people comfortable with those systems. So I became really interested in the behavioral side of the workplace. And then I landed up moving to the US and working for McKinsey. And a lot of the work we did, I'll cut a long story short, so I landed up in the US. A lot of the work we did was strategy work. And we would give these beautiful reports that are beautifully written to the clients. And then I had the sinking feeling like, often they just didn't know what to do with them or how to actually turn them into a reality. And so again, it was the people side that made the difference. So long story short, I moved to Australia. And since 1999, what I've been doing, I worked for a short while for a culture change organization, which was fantastic. And then I put it all together in 1999 to look at a multidisciplinary approach that takes into account all disciplines. So the business commercial aspect, the systems aspect, the people aspect, and very importantly as well, the project management aspect to get the traction. And I was doing a whole lot of these transformation projects, and I looked around a few years ago and realized I'd plucked up over 50 of them with a 96% success rate. So only 2 of them had failed. And I keep reading out there that the failure rates are really high. So, you can argue, well, what does it mean to fail in a project, right? But essentially, Harvard Business Review reported last year 77% failure. McKinsey reports 70% failure on their site. These are all those sorts of projects, Kyle, where you're doing transformation or systems change or projects or strategy execution, call it whatever you like. And that's unacceptable. It's unacceptable that at this day and age, with all the tools that we have and all the knowledge that we have and all the change management and project management where people throw at this stuff, don't you think that's crazy?
Yeah, it's crazy, and it's a little bit depressing because I think it's the reality is that we've got such high hopes for these digital transformations, and I've been a part of a number of them, and I'll be honest, as I reflect back on some of those journeys that I've been a part of, the first word that comes to mind is painful. And I don't know if I'd call them all failures, but I would certainly describe many of them as very challenging, and certainly, almost 9 times out of 10, you fall behind schedule, or the actual deliverable would not be what we had planned on, or there was my favorite is the one where you've got this the plan to eliminate a head because of this digital journey, and you end up needing a person just to manage the digital journey. So you got rid of the one head, but you added another one to manage. So I feel like, I feel like you're kind of, you're preaching to the choir a little bit about some of the challenges here. I'm fascinated because you've got such a high success rate. What's different? Why is there a higher success rate with the approach that you've taken in some of these transformations that you've led?
So thank you for asking me that, because this is my favorite topic really to talk about, because this gets me onto my bandwagon about why things aren't done right. Right. So there's 4 reasons: business, change management, project management, and culture. So I draw 3 circles in a Venn diagram, right? So the top is the business focus. So the projects need to be very commercially focused. And the more people that are working on those projects that really understand the outcome of the project, the strategy behind the project, the context and business reason for it, that is absolutely critical. That's number 1. And that's what gives you that precision of what you need to do. So, you talk about outcomes not being achieved. Very often on these projects, people haven't even got agreement on what those outcomes are, or they're not actually clear enough. So that's number 1. Do you agree with me? Do you see that as yeah?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. The what I would call the stakeholder alignment, right? Like, do we all agree what we're actually doing, right?
Yeah.
So yes, I totally agree.
So actually, and that sits sort of between the middle of the second circle. So the business focus is actually getting really clear on the right outcomes for the business. And then the next circle, change management, is getting the people aligned to that outcome. So it sort of sits between those 2, right? And that's what gives you the momentum on the projects, right? And if you can get people behind you, like I've done this where I've built communities inside organizations. I'm really passionate about communities. And I built them inside the organization so that as you do co-design with of the projects of the transformation with the people in the organization, you build in that excitement. So you don't have a separate strategy formulation stage separate to the implementation. You're actually implementing right from the beginning, because if you talk to people at all levels, they will already start adjusting what they're doing in line with the new strategy. So for example, if it's AI, right, we were talking before about AI and how it's just so, it's grown so prolifically. There's so many people scared of AI. So, get them involved right from the beginning in your digital transformation, and already they're learning and they're doing things differently, rather than having to wait until the strategy is signed off by the executive, signed off by the board, announced to the organization. And then 4 or 5 months down the line, and then the world's changed. So people is second. The change management is absolutely critical. The third ingredient is project management. And I don't believe enough folks that are implementing projects understand project management to get the traction. And it's all done by separate project managers who are often just Gantt chart jockeys, and they don't actually understand the business and the change. So you've got those 3 circles. But, in the more sophisticated organizations that I deal with, so I work with a lot of multinationals, big organizations, big Australian organizations, government, they all tend these days to have change management and project management, right? And they have obviously the executives with the business focus. But those 3 circles are like separate islands. They're not integrated well. And the people, the leads that are running those projects don't understand how to integrate them well. So that one task can actually suit all 3 objectives if you know what you're doing. So those are the 3 things. And then all of that needs to be aligned to the culture. So if you draw a big circle around my Venn diagram and imagine that those 3 circles are floating in a sea of culture, that is the context of the organization. And I don't see projects being, the approach being adjusted to the culture sufficiently. And that's my approach. So it's not hard to achieve if people actually take the time to understand and learn it. And that's what I'm all about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think, it all makes perfect sense. I do love a good Gantt chart, and so I am a little bit guilty of being a Gantt chart jockey as you described it. But I'm fascinated. I want to talk a little bit more about what you talked about, being building a community and having that be a kind of a what I would call a part of the sustainable transformation, or part of that change management. And certainly I have a feeling that leads into the having the right culture as well. But I think in all, to sum it up, you're kind of preaching to the choir here, because it doesn't matter if you have the best tech tool in the world, or AI or HR system or whatever. But the reality is, a lot of this comes down to people, right? It's really it's the people fulfilling the tasks and working on the project. And so, as you look at transformation, how do you determine how and when you need to focus on building that community within this transformation process?
Okay. I'm going to answer your question about community, Kyle, but I'm going to go back to Gantt chart jockey because
Okay.
I really think that a Gantt chart is important and useful. So I didn't mean to denigrate it. But what I do believe is that the folks that can only do those Gantt charts and do, like the pieces of the project plan in a mechanical fashion and don't have any business acumen and don't understand the people side, those are often the folks that are put in charge of projects. And that's where there's that circle around project management is disconnected from the rest of the Venn diagram, right? And that's where you don't actually leverage all the other parts sufficiently. And I can give you some examples of projects that have failed because of that. So I do want to give respect to the Gantt chart because I can use them myself in my days of doing program management. Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. I think you said it much more eloquently than I could, but it's the fact is that you could use all these project management tools that you want or know how the tools work, but if you don't understand the people, the process, the business, the organization, it's not going to matter. And maybe the only thing I'd say there too for any listeners, if you haven't gotten some level of project management training or experience in your career, I would highly encourage you to. Because an HR person with a project management background, you're like unstoppable.
That is exactly it. You couldn't have said about it. I couldn't have said about it. So that is why the work I do in this membership community that I've got, which is called Turbocharge Your Transformation, has that integrated approach, right? So that an HR person can come in and learn project management from the angle of people rather than from that boring angle. So many HR people that I work with, they don't really like the very overly processed parts of it. And it's taught from a very process point of view. So what I do is I teach project management, change management, business acumen and tools like AI all together as an integrated whole from that behavioral perspective. So let me go back to sorry. And I don't mean to just talk about my membership but I'm just really excited about it because I don't think there's anything at the moment out there that is quite like that. And because it's not just training, it's an ongoing community that I'm building, of professionals in the transformation space. And they don't all call themselves transformation. They call it, they might be an HR manager or a marketing manager or people that are just doing projects as part of their work. And they don't want to go and do a 5-day week, PMBOK or Prince 2 course and have all of that processed. So it's not done in that way. It's a lighter touch, and more practical. So building community, let's go back to that topic that you asked me, Kyle. So this is really important because if you set up, so I don't separate the strategy development and the strategy implementation phases. I do them all together right at the beginning, involving the people. And I usually do that with a cross-functional working group that sits across the organization in the strategic spaces where we need to influence and involve people. And those cross-functional working groups are amazing. So like one of them on a project we had for a professional services firm, we had just about 8 or 9 core project team members. But when we celebrated, it was a project all about digital and customer service. When we celebrated the project at the end, because the organization won numerous awards for service and for technology, there were 120 people on the video for the celebration. And they had all changed their jobs. These were marketing people. These were HR people. These were trainers. These were IT people. Because they were involved from the beginning, they had changed what they were doing in their jobs along the way. And they had total ownership in what we were doing. So they saw that their role was as much part of the project team as the very core project team. Have you seen that in organizations where you've seen that level of buy-in dispersed for a program of work? Have you come across that sort of that internal community?
Yeah, I think it's funny that you mentioned that. I rarely, I think is the honest answer, but there are it's It's the individuals that still lament about, oh, you remember when we had to do this together, and it was this, oh yeah, Larry had to go do that, and and then we had to, and then so and so had to step in here, and oh that, and this was crazy. Remember that? It's almost like this. It's like this lore that's created around these projects, and it is fascinating to see. It's almost like individuals that have built a kind of a fraternal bond through these types of projects. But I would say pretty rare in my experience, especially as I think about more recent projects that I've been a part of.
And it's so powerful because that's what creates a critical mass of momentum in the organization. And you can't stop it. It's like a rolling stone that just gathers pace. And then it's got a life of its own. And then, many change managers talk about, I presented at a conference on Friday, and a lot of the talk was about, how do you make change stick? And do you actually make change stick? Because change is always constant anyway. So, but the point is that whatever you do has got to be sustainable, so that when the project team goes away and takes the pressure off, that journey is continued, because it is a journey. It doesn't really have a defined, digital transformation, change. It's a journey, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I do think that it's one of the bigger challenges, and I think many of us have felt this within our organizations and outside. If you look at the news media, it almost seems like change is getting more and more rapid, and I think a lot of the challenges that at least that I deal with are how to manage that change appropriately without either, A, going too slow and falling behind, everybody else, or B, going too quickly and like burning everybody out and like leaving your team in the dust and not bringing everybody along. So how have you found to do that effectively, where you balance the change appropriately so that you're in that kind of sweet spot within transformation? How do you work through that and make sure that it's that's appropriate level of kind of change and stasis?
I love that question, because that's all about the culture. So I teach people how to define the culture of the organization. And for me, it's really important to be specific. So an article I published last year, I said, don't say you've got a great culture, right? It's too vague. It doesn't mean anything. Like, I hear that from the boards. I hear it from the CEOs. I hear it from management, and it doesn't say anything. When you're talking about your culture, you've got an opportunity to send a message and be really specific about the culture that you want. And so I say, choose 3 words, and it's probably going to be a hybrid of the standard archetypes. So if you look at, I'll take 2 extremes. So let's take a really high performance, results focused organization on one extreme, where you can actually get very fast change. And then let's take another example of a risk averse culture, where very much focused on, worrying about, so law firms, often government, large government bureaucracies, banks would fall into this category. There's particularly been a lot of scrutiny on the banks in Australia, but I know, through all the changes in the US, you've also had a lot of issues in terms of bank failure. So they're very risk averse. So by understanding the culture, you can then adjust your approach in those 3 circles that I mentioned to that culture. So let's say, and then that will determine the speed that you can work at, because then you're working with the culture rather than, I call it, like, I think of it as, so many people work against the culture because they're actually pushing things like, so in your risk averse culture, if you're going to push very fast to try and get things through, of course it's not going to work. You're going to get a lot of resistance, because those folks want to see, so from a business point of view, they want to see that the risk has been covered off and that the business case is solid. From a people perspective, they want buy-in, and they want confidence is really important in a risk management environment. And then from a project management point of view, you need a lot of type governance in a very risk-orientated culture, because if they don't have that project governance, you don't know who's signing what off. You don't know about the due process can be compromised. So all those 3 circles are adjusted to the culture. And the same for a high performance culture, except you can go way faster. Because in the risk averse culture, you're doing a whole lot of trials and being really careful. Whereas in a performance oriented culture, you can just point people in the right direction, tell them what the results are, why it's a good idea, and they're off. And you don't need a lot of project governance.
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself, I get frustrated too. Why? And this as being one of my best friends is, hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
Yeah, and I think what's fascinating about that is the reality is that without some sort of a way to think about this, or some sort of like a methodology to be aware of this, you're relying on maybe yourself or maybe a project manager who may or may not know the players to guess about how quickly can we go, and how slow do we need to go, or who are the holdouts, right? Because that's the other thing too, right? Some people are comfortable moving fast and some people are not.
Exactly.
And it can make or break a project.
Exactly.
So I'm curious. I'm curious as I look at the at the system and the transformation approach. You've got this flywheel effect that you have found is a result. Can you walk us through what you mean by the flywheel effect and how that leads to return on investment and ultimately innovation?
Great. So what happens is once you've got the business focus really clear, you've got precision. Once you've got the change management integrated and clear, you've got momentum. Once you've got the third circle, which is the project management organized around the culture, you have got traction. And with those 3 things, precision, momentum, and traction, you've got all the ingredients, integrated approach to the culture. So you're working at the right speed, and also the change leader or innovation leader or HR leader is actually adjusting their style to fit well in the culture as well. And all of that is what gives you that flywheel effect, and you can go faster. And and that flywheel, I use the flywheel term because of that heavy rotational wheel that stores that energy. And like when you're on a spin bike, it takes a little while to put your foot on the pedal, right? And it just takes that, because it's a very heavy wheel, that flywheel that's sitting at the back of your spin bike. I love a good spin bike class in the gym, but it takes a little while at the beginning because you've got to kind of put your foot down and push hard to get it going. But once it goes, it starts flying, right? It goes really, really fast. And that's what I do with the community building, right? So you build these communities, you set up the project governance and the people involved in these cross-functional working groups, these internal communities, and they have a very clear business remit. And what is amazing, Kyle, is the success of these people's careers. So I remember one very junior woman being involved in one of the projects, and she was an HR coordinator, like a junior HR business partner kind of role, but very junior. And she was put onto the project because the HR director, who was the sponsor, saw something in her. And she just shone. She was amazing. So that when that project finished, her career just took off. So that's what I mean by flywheel, because there's that win-win-win effect, right? Is a win for the organization because we implemented a coordinated digital HR like a help desk, right? Yeah, like a service center.
Sure.
So there's a win for the organization. There's a win for the individuals that are seconded onto those projects because they shine. You can really see, they're stepping out of their roles and they really can step up. And then the third win is for the people in the organization, because if you do this, if you approach these projects in a participative manner, people that are closest to the customer, they have got so much shop floor people. I've involved a group of clerical people in one organization that had never been involved in the projects. They always had senior people do it. And when we reported on projects that I took them on the train. We've got a really good train system in Sydney, and I took them all on the train together up to head office to present to the executive about what we were doing, because I wanted them to hear it directly from people. And the executive was really surprised, like, why are you bringing the whole, really? And and the team were super excited and really nervous because they'd never gone to head office to present to the executive. And it's a win-win. It is such a win-win. It was the project was just, there was such a flywheel effect of momentum. It was just amazing. Amazing.
Yeah. And I think, the spin bike thing resonates with me because I am a cyclist, but like only outside typically. I'll get on a spin bike and pure desperation. It's also really, this is a PSA. It's really hard to stop. So don't try to just stop the pedals or stop. But I think that exemplifies the benefit of that flywheel effect, right? It's like once you get going, it's a lot harder to stop, right? The momentum can carry you through, even as you see an obstacle in your way. It can help carry you through.
Exactly.
I think a couple, really, really great takeaways from our conversation here. Certainly, I think a really good reminder that, as HR professionals, as practitioners, we've got to be well versed in many different aspects of our organizations and be curious and willing to learn in order to help drive transformations and really be the change that our organizations need us to be, which is why I'm guessing you're listening to this podcast. So Lisa, thank you so much for spending a few minutes here with us. I want to shift gears, and I'm fascinated to hear your response to the Rebel HR Flash Round. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Okay, question number 1. Where does HR need to rebel?
Well, I think HR could be so much more powerful if they take the time to focus on the business aspects of, like, really, if they give really good commercial advice. The HR folks that I've seen that are the strongest are the ones that really understand the business. They get amazing respect. And so what I think they need to do is they've got that, the T-shaped model of skills. They've got the depth and the specialization. They need to round out the top of their T, that multidisciplinary approach, which includes a business focus. Project management, is great for them too, just to understand all those mechanics so they can just be awesome in their jobs. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. I think it's what sets the good apart from the great. Right. And I think we need to be willing to admit that and be willing to step outside of our comfort zone a little bit.
Yeah.
Question number 2. Who should we be listening to?
All right. Well, I think everyone. I think the more we put our ear to the ground and really listen to different perspectives. So right from the most junior people in the organization through to the most senior, to the customers that are out there, to all, whatever we can listen to in terms of great podcasts like this one, go to conferences, go find mentors, just talk to different people and get different perspectives on what you're doing, because I think the world's got to a very complex place. And I think not one person will know everything they need to know in this future of work.
Absolutely. It's funny. I just did a presentation last week about it's similar context, but it's like, if you're starting a band, you're not going to be lead singer, guitarist, drummer, bass player, whatever else is in the band, right? Like you have to lean on other people, and that's the reality of the work that we do in human resources. You've got to listen to everybody, and everybody's got something different and a different perspective or a different part to play. So, if we can be anything, we should be the connectors and listen and learn from others. So couldn't agree more. All right. Last question. How can our listeners reach out, connect with you, and learn more about how to turbocharge their transformation?
Well, I have a whole turbocharge page on our website, which is futurebuildersgroup.com. And if you go /turbocharge, you'll find the turbocharge page. Also at the bottom of that page is a free diagnostic tool where you can fill out some questions and actually get a percentage score of your confidence. It's a self-assessment, your confidence in 10 different areas that are, all of these areas that I'm talking about, like culture and project planning and that sort of thing. So folks can fill that out and they can get their team to fill it out. And it's a fantastic resource because you can have a conversation with your team and really understand across the different functions in HR or your different business functions where the different folks have their specialties. So, like you say, not everybody can be good at everything, Kyle. But if you see your team, how the distribution is across your team, you'll know that you've covered all those elements really well, all the elements of transformation.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we will have all that information in the show notes. So, I encourage you to open up your podcast player, check it out. Lisa, it's just been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you for spending your morning with us.
Thank you, Kyle. It's been fantastic being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, that does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.